3 continents. That is the geographic scope of the diplomatic collapse that is now fully documented, fully operational, and fully visible to every foreign ministry, every sovereign wealth fund, and every military planning staff on Earth. Canada filing at the WTO, Europe's 27 signatures at the United Nations, Japan and South Korea declining participation in the Gulf Security Framework, Australia co-signing the General Assembly resolution, the Five Eyes intelligence partnership degraded to limited liaison, and the Allied coalition that was supposed to share the burden of this conflict reduced to a total of 0 nations providing active military support. 0. The most powerful military in the history of civilization is conducting an active conflict in the world's most strategically sensitive region against a nuclear threshold adversary, with proxy forces striking Saudi infrastructure and threatening a waterway that carries 1/5 of the world's oil. And it is doing it entirely alone. Not one ally providing active military support. Not one allied nation providing intelligence at full partnership level. Not one Security Council partner providing diplomatic cover. Not one of the 32 NATO members standing beside it. Alone. And the administration's response to being asked at a briefing this week whether the United States was now operating without allied support is the sentence that will define this moment in every foreign policy history written for the next 50 years. America has never needed permission to defend its interests. We don't need it now. In the next few minutes, I am going to show you exactly what fighting a major conflict alone, strategically, diplomatically, economically, and institutionally, actually costs, in concrete and measurable terms that go far beyond the military theater, sourced from analysis by the RAND Corporation, the Brookings Institution, and the International Institute for Strategic Studies, published in the last 72 hours, from Allied government statements confirmed by Reuters and the Financial Times, and from the institutional record this series has built across 15 scripts documenting each component of the collapse as it occurred. I am going to show you why the phrase, "America doesn't need permission," is not a statement of strength. It is a description of a position that the United States has never before occupied, and that the designers of American post-war strategy specifically structured 79 years of alliance architecture to prevent. And I am going to tell you why. The world you are living in right now is the most strategically isolated America has been since December 8, 1941. Not because America is weak, but because the alliances that multiplied American power beyond what American power alone could achieve have been systematically and documented spent. America is not losing the war. America is winning the military campaign in a world where winning the military campaign is no longer sufficient. Because the war was never only military, and the dimensions where it is not military are the dimensions where America is now fighting alone. Without the partners, without the institutions, and without the legitimacy that turns military power into lasting strategic outcome. The United States didn't just lose Allied support. It lost the force multiplier that has made American military power strategically decisive since 1945. That distinction matters. A country fighting alone with American military capability is enormously powerful. It can strike, destroy, degrade, and project force at a scale no other nation on Earth can match. But a country fighting alone cannot achieve the diplomatic outcomes that translate military superiority into stable resolution. It cannot maintain the economic coalition that sustains the pressure campaign through the attrition phase. It cannot manage the second, third, and fourth order effects of a major conflict in the world's most interconnected region without the institutional architecture that allies provide. It cannot convert the military result into the political settlement without the legitimacy that multilateral support confers. The United States can win every battle in this conflict and still not achieve the strategic outcome that the conflict was supposed to produce, because the strategic outcome requires the cooperation of countries that America has spent 15 months systematically alienating, and those countries are now filing legal briefs, downgrading intelligence, co-signing UN resolutions, and declining to return the phone calls that would begin the process of managing what comes after the shooting stops. Trump has military dominance. He has diplomatic vacancy. And in the gap between military dominance and diplomatic vacancy, the war that can be won on the battlefield is already being lost in the institutions, the markets, the alliances, and the international record that determine what the victory actually produces. Imagine you are the strongest player in a multiplayer game, by far the strongest, capable of defeating any single opponent decisively. The game requires both military and diplomatic moves to win. You are dominant in military moves, but you have spent the last 18 months antagonizing every other player, taking their resources, ignoring their rules, dismissing their warnings, and insulting their leaders publicly. Now you need to make the diplomatic moves that complete the win. But the other players, individually weaker than you, have coordinated their diplomatic pieces against yours. You can still make military moves, you can still strike, but every diplomatic square on the board is contested by a coordinated opposition you created through your own previous choices. You cannot lose the military game, but you cannot finish the diplomatic one. And the game does not end with military dominance alone. Hold that thought, because that is the precise strategic position the United States has constructed for itself, and the players who have coordinated their diplomatic pieces did not organize themselves. They were organized by the choices that this series has documented from Script 1. Drop your answer in the comments. Is the United States' current strategic isolation a temporary cost of decisive unilateral action that will ultimately be justified by the outcome? Or is the loss of the Allied coalition the strategic failure that renders the military outcome insufficient, regardless of what it achieves on the battlefield? This is the central question of the next decade of American foreign policy. Let us rewind the clock. This didn't start with 3 continents. It started with 15 decisions, each documented in this series, that this script now names together for the first time in sequence. The Iran strikes launched without the Allied consultation 26 partners formally requested. The casualty numbers suppressed for 31 hours. The intelligence assessments overridden by political preference. The War Powers notification filed 4 days late under a legal description the Rubio audio has shown to be false. The Gulf Security Guarantee Framework never constructed despite a DIA assessment saying it was required. The NEO not activated despite 14,000 American civilians in the conflict zone. The 4 written warnings from European partners dismissed. The Canadian tariff threat that produced a WTO suspension filing. The intelligence partnership with Four Eyes partners degraded to limited liaison. The 27-nation EU statement at the United Nations. The 40-nation General Assembly resolution, 112-47. The NRSC memo showing 7-point deficits in competitive Senate states. And the authenticated Rubio audio describing regime change as the real war aim, while sworn congressional testimony said otherwise. 15 decisions, 15 documented moments, each covered in this series as it happened. Now assembled together, they describe not a series of miscalculations, but a pattern, an administration that prioritized the appearance of strength over the architecture of sustained leverage, that spent the institutional capital accumulated over 79 years of alliance investment in 18 months of unilateral assertion, and that arrived at this week exactly as the warnings said it would. The Trump administration's entire strategic posture was built on one catastrophic assumption: that the combination of overwhelming American military capability and the residual institutional inertia of 79 years of alliance habit would keep the alliance architecture operational, regardless of how it was treated. That allies would absorb any level of dismissal, any level of tariff threat, any level of unilateral action, and still show up when needed, because the alternative to American leadership was too unattractive for them to seriously consider. The Brookings Institution published a paper challenging this assumption 22 months ago. The paper was written by a former deputy national security advisor and 2 former ambassadors. It argued that alliance relationships are not geological formations, stable under any pressure, requiring catastrophic force to displace. They are institutional relationships maintained by demonstrated reciprocity, sustained over time, that erode steadily under sustained unilateral pressure until a threshold is crossed and the relationship's operating assumptions are revised. The paper identified the specific threshold at which Allied governments would transition from absorbing American pressure to formally resisting it. The threshold at which the domestic political cost of continued alignment with American policy exceeded the domestic political cost of formal distance. The paper projected that at the rate of deterioration it was observing, that threshold would be crossed within 24 months. It was crossed in 22. Receipt number 1. The alliance math. Hat tip to the International Institute for Strategic Studies, whose annual military balance report, supplemented this week by an emergency strategic assessment responding to the current conflict, quantifies what Allied military, intelligence, and diplomatic contributions have historically provided to American-led operations, and what their absence now costs in concrete operational terms. The numbers are not small. In every major American military operation since Korea, Allied contributions have provided between 22 and 47% of the total strategic value delivered, not just in troops and hardware, but in the intelligence collection that creates targeting accuracy, the basing rights that extend operational range, the diplomatic cover that manages the regional political environment, the economic coalition that sustains the pressure campaign, and the post-conflict stabilization capacity that converts military results into durable political outcomes. The Gulf War Coalition provided 42% of total strategic value by the IISS methodology. The Afghanistan operation's Allied contributions provided 31%. Even the Iraq operation, which was broadly criticized for its thin coalition, received 24% of its strategic value from Allied contributions. The current Iran operation is receiving 0% from Allied contributions. Not diminished Allied support, 0. The IISS assessment projects that the operational consequence of 0 Allied contribution in a conflict of this complexity, in a theater with this level of proxy network activity, this level of economic interdependency, and this level of diplomatic management requirement, is not a 25 to 40% reduction in strategic effectiveness. It is a structural change in the nature of achievable outcomes. There are outcomes that American military power alone can achieve. There are outcomes that require the institutional ecosystem that Allied partnerships provide. The outcomes in the second category, the diplomatic settlement, the post-conflict stabilization, the regional political architecture that prevents the conflict from restarting, are precisely the outcomes that require the ecosystem, and the ecosystem is not available. Stop right there. Because the ISS finding is not that America is less effective. It is that America is effective at a different and smaller set of things than it was 72 hours before the first Allied withdrawal from partnership status. The military campaign can continue. The strategic outcome the military campaign was designed to produce cannot be achieved by the military campaign alone. That gap between what the military can do and what the strategy requires is the gap that allies were supposed to fill. And the allies are in Brussels, and Ottawa, and Tokyo, and Seoul, holding the documents that explain why they are not available to fill it. Receipt number 2, the economic isolation premium. Here is the part that should make your blood boil. Fighting alone has a price tag. Not the military budget, that is visible and being supplemented through emergency appropriations. The invisible price tag is the economic isolation premium, the additional cost the American economy pays in every market because the international institutional framework that reduces friction for American economic activity is being operated by governments currently adversarial to American policy. The dollar reserve premium has been compressing. Treasury yields are elevated. Lloyd's war risk designation adds $13 to $33 million per day to Gulf transit costs. The Canadian 30-day counter-tariff clock threatens $360 billion of American exports. The EU diplomatic statement has created regulatory cooperation uncertainty in European regulated markets. The intelligence downgrade means military operations run on degraded information. Each of those costs is individually manageable. Together, they are the economic signature of strategic isolation, running across every American household, every business, every retirement account, and every borrower simultaneously. The Congressional Budget Office, in a preliminary assessment requested by the Senate Budget Committee and published this week, estimates the total additional annualized economic cost of the current strategic isolation at between $280 and $340 billion per year. $340 billion. Distributed across 330 million Americans, that is $1,030 per person per year. Not from the military budget, but from the economic isolation premium embedded in everything. The government told you fighting alone is how America fights best. The CBO told you it costs $1,030 per person per year. The market does not wait for the government to revise the estimate. If this channel is the first place you have seen the IISS Alliance math, the CBO economic isolation premium, and the 15 decision pattern assembled together, you are now ahead of most Americans trying to understand why this week's isolation is not a temporary diplomatic difficulty, but the cumulative strategic outcome of a documented sequence of choices. Subscribe right now. The NATO Foreign Ministers' emergency session and the Senate War Powers vote are both expected within 10 days, and both events will determine whether the isolation deepens or begins to reverse. Be here for both. Now compare what the IISS assessment, the CBO estimate, and the 15 decision patterns say to what the administration is saying. The National Security Advisor was asked this week whether the absence of Allied support represented a strategic failure. He said, and this is a direct quote, "America has never fought its best fights with committees. We fight with capability and conviction. Every nation on earth knows that when America is committed, the outcome is not in doubt." Every nation on earth knows the outcome is not in doubt. 112 of those nations just voted against the American position at the United Nations. 40 of them co-signed the resolution. 4 of them are the intelligence partners who have known America's most intimate secrets since the Second World War. And his analysis is that every nation on earth knows. When a reporter followed up and asked whether the administration had a plan to re-engage Allied partners, to rebuild the coalition, the National Security Advisor said, "Our door is always open. Allies who want to be part of the solution are welcome. Allies who want to be part of the solution are welcome." The allies who wanted to be part of the solution asked for consultation before the strikes, asked for a coalition framework, asked for a war powers vote, asked for a ceasefire mechanism, asked for a multilateral diplomatic track, filed formal written warnings, submitted legal objections, signed resolutions, downgraded intelligence partnerships, filed at the WTO. And his analysis is that the door is open. The door is open. In the house where the load-bearing wall has already been removed. These are not serious people managing a serious strategic crisis. These are performers describing the strength of a position that the institutional record documents as isolated, the economic record documents as costly, and the alliance record documents as uniquely unprecedented in the post-war history of American foreign policy. Here is the part that should keep every strategist focused on the next 30 years of American power awake tonight. Receipt number 3, the precedent architecture. The most consequential consequence of fighting alone is not what it costs this week. It is what it establishes permanently. The alteration of strategic assumptions that every potential adversary, every uncertain ally, and every watching neutral will carry forward when calculating how to behave toward the United States in every future crisis. The Rand Corporation, in a strategic assessment published 48 hours ago, identifies 3 specific precedents being established that will outlast this conflict regardless of its military outcome. Precedent 1. The American alliance system is conditional, not structural. Every government now knows from direct operational experience that American alliance commitments can be rendered functionally void by a single administration's choices without any change in formal treaty architecture. The NATO treaty still exists, the mutual defense commitments still exist, but Four Eyes partners have downgraded the intelligence relationship, and NATO members have signed a resolution against the American military operation. Treaty architecture did not protect operational relationships when those relationships were stressed. Every government in Asia, calculating its defense posture relative to China, now knows that American treaty commitments and American operational commitment are not the same thing. Precedent 2. Multilateral institutions can be successfully weaponized against American policy without American exit from those institutions. The United States remained in the United Nations while 112 members voted against it. Remained in NATO while 31 members refused active support. Remained party to USMCA while Canada used its dispute resolution mechanism to file counter-tariff notice. The institutional architecture America built to manage international behavior can be operated against American behavior. China has already documented this precedent in its military and diplomatic planning literature. Precedent 3. The cost of opposing American policy is lower than at any point in the post-war era. Canada formally opposed American tariff policy, and its economic reorientation, diplomatic positioning, and domestic political standing all improved relative to continued absorption. Europe formally opposed the military operation, and European governments' domestic positions improved in every country that signed the resolution. The deterrent still exists, but its magnitude has been permanently reduced by demonstrated evidence that opposing American policy is a manageable cost, with a well-documented playbook now available to every government that considers it. Those three precedents will shape the strategic environment the next American president inherits. They are being established this week. They will not be unestablished by a ceasefire. There is one image from this week that captures the entire story. On one side, a White House briefing room podium, the flag, the seal, the National Security Advisor saying, "America has never fought its best fights with committees, that every nation on earth knows the outcome is not in doubt, that the door is always open," performing the confidence of a country that does not need permission, projecting the strength of an alliance leader to an audience that cannot see the alliance is no longer following. Alone at a podium, describing a coalition that is not there. On the other side, every other capital on earth, Brussels, Ottawa, Tokyo, Seoul, Canberra, Berlin, Paris, London, Riyadh, each one with a different reason, each one with a different document, each one with a different institutional mechanism, but all of them oriented in the same direction, away from the podium, toward a strategic arrangement that does not depend on the reliability of the government speaking from it. America speaks from the podium. The world orients away from it. America says the door is open. The Allies filed documents through a different door. America says every nation knows the outcome is not in doubt. 112 voted to express their doubt. America says it has never needed permission. The alliance it built required no permission. It offered partnership. And the partnership is gone. America performs strength. 3 continents perform distance. The NSA says fighting alone is how America fights best. The IISS says fighting alone costs 47% of achievable strategic outcomes. One side is at the podium. The other side is in the permanent record. So what does this actually mean for you? Not for strategists. For the person watching this. If you are an American who has spent your life in a country that has not fought a major conflict truly alone since before the Second World War, what is being established this week is a new strategic baseline that your children and grandchildren will inherit. Not arriving as a single dramatic event, but structurally embedded in the 3 RAND precedents and in the CBO's $340 billion annual economic isolation premium. The America your children inherit will have the same military capability you grew up with. It will have less institutional leverage, less allied amplification, and a higher baseline cost for every foreign policy action it takes. If you run a business that competes internationally, the dollar reserve premium compression, the yield elevation, the regulatory friction in European markets, the Canadian trade disruption, and the energy price cascade are costs your international competitors in non-isolated countries do not share. German manufacturers, Canadian exporters, Japanese technology firms are competing in the same global market you are, but in an economic environment where their government's institutional relationships have not been stressed the way America's have this year. The competitive disadvantage is not dramatic today. It compounds. If you are anyone at all, the $340 billion of annual economic isolation premium is $1,030 per American per year. It is in your gasoline price, your grocery bill, your heating cost, your mortgage rate, your retirement account return, and the borrowing cost of the federal government you backstop as a taxpayer. It is invisible, undramatic, distributed across millions of transactions, and it is the price of the decision to fight alone, framed as strength, paid by everyone. The NSA said America doesn't need permission. The IISS, the CBO, the RAND Corporation, and 3 continents of allied governments all say the permission was never the point. The partnership was, and the partnership is what was lost. Here is the hard truth. The administration did not set out to isolate America. It set out to reassert American primacy, to demonstrate that American power was sufficient to achieve American objectives without the friction of multilateral consultation or the constraint of allied partnership. The vision was not isolation. The vision was unencumbered American leadership. What the vision did not account for is that unencumbered leadership, exercised without reciprocity and without the institutional architecture that converts power into legitimacy, does not produce unencumbered outcomes. It produces encumbered isolation. Every objective the administration is trying to achieve, the diplomatic settlement, the post-conflict regional architecture, the economic stabilization, the constitutional legitimacy, requires the cooperation of institutions and governments that the unencumbered approach has made unavailable. America is not weak. America is alone. Those are not the same thing. But in the strategic environment this conflict has created, they produce the same outcome. Where does this go from here? I see three paths. The first is the managed return. The Rubio audio crisis produces enough domestic political and institutional pressure through the Senate War Powers vote, the DOJ assessment, and allied formal objections to force genuine recalibration. The administration appoints a credible special envoy with real authority to rebuild allied engagement. A multilateral ceasefire framework is negotiated, not American terms, but negotiated, giving European, Arab, and Asian partners genuine stake in the outcome. Intelligence partnerships are restored. The WTO filing resolves through a bilateral Canada framework. The isolation ends, not because the administration wanted it to, but because political and institutional pressure made continuation more costly than recalibration. The three RAND precedents are partially mitigated. America exits diplomatically diminished but institutionally reconnected. The 50-year alliance system survives in an altered form, but even in this best case, the 15 decisions are documented. The economic isolation premium does not instantly reverse, and the precedents are established, mitigated, not eliminated, because they are permanent features of the strategic record every foreign capital now holds. The second path is the extended isolation. The recalibration does not happen. Allied engagement offers are too transactional to reverse the calculation that dependence on American reliability now costs more than structural distance. The EU Strategic Autonomy Project accelerates. Japan and South Korea deepen their bilateral security relationship outside the American framework. Gulf states manage the post-conflict regional architecture through Chinese and Russian intermediation. The dollar reserve share completes its Peterson Institute projected decline. The economic isolation premium runs at $340 billion annually for the remainder of the term. The next American president inherits the three RAND precedents as the operating strategic baseline. The alliance has not collapsed, but it has been hollowed, present as structure, absent as operational partnership, in ways that will take a decade of sustained, credible, multilateral engagement to begin rebuilding. The cost is generational. It is paid by the children. The third path is the cascade completion. This is the one nobody wants to say out loud. The military conflict escalates rather than resolves. A second Abqaiq strike, a nuclear test by Iran's new supreme leader, a miscalculation that produces American casualties at a scale that transforms the domestic political environment. Unable to build the diplomatic framework for a settlement because the allies who would constitute that framework are not available, the administration escalates militarily rather than de-escalates diplomatically, because escalation is what unilateral military power does when diplomatic options are exhausted. The escalation produces a regional response: Gulf state instability, strait closure, cascade completion of every scenario this series has documented. The Federal Reserve is overwhelmed. The dollar reserve share falls past the Peterson Institute's projected threshold. The economic isolation premium doubles. The congressional fracture becomes an open break. The Senate majority is lost. The lame duck final 2 years are governed by a president without allies, without a congressional majority, without a functioning multilateral framework, and without the institutional architecture to manage a conflict that is still ongoing. You would normally say the institutional resilience of the oldest constitutional democracy in the world would prevent the cascade from running to completion. But the war powers clock expired. The NEO was not activated. The warnings were not heeded. The audio was recorded, and there are no more guardrails.